long ending. We are excited to light up the world here at Salem Grace Church Nazarene, and we're going to be starting a new message series in 2 weeks, not next week, but the week after, called Light Up the World, and really just kind of goes directly with our vision and our theme that we've rolled out a couple weeks ago about being the light and to lighting up our community, lighting up the map of Salem, and lighting up this geographic area, and to really grow people spiritually in their spiritual formation. And so that's something that we're going to be starting in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be talking to you about a little bit. You're going to be hearing a lot more about that, but I wanted to give you a heads up that is coming, and looking forward to that message series. But it's good to be back in church. I think I'm a little bit heavier this week. I don't know if anybody else, right? I don't know. I've eaten so much stuff, and I'm ashamed of myself. But hopefully you had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and if you don't, if you don't have stretchy pants, I would highly recommend getting stretchy pants before next Thanksgiving. And I couldn't help but think about what kind of America we would have lived in if pilgrims would have had stretchy pants. But I'm grateful and thankful for Thanksgiving, and that I live in this country. We have so much to be grateful for, don't we? And so I'm excited about that. But it's a great time. We had a great, we did something for the first time this year that we've never done at Salem Grace, and that was to have Thanksgiving dinner here on Thanksgiving. It was a wild success, even though it was kind of short notice. We had many of you that stepped up and brought pies and food and provided, the actual meal. And we ended up serving about roughly right around 100 people, which was great for our first time. We were excited about that. We even flagged people off the road that came in and ate. So it was pretty exciting stuff. It was great to be a part of that. But we have been talking the last couple of weeks about a series called The First 90 Days. And just so you know, we have 62 days remaining in our first 90 days. And so it's coming around very quickly, and we'll get through this first 90 days. And we've been talking about the 4 things that we want to accomplish and that we want to do really, really good at in these first 90 days. And it's the acronym of PIGS. I don't know why that stick, but I don't like it. It's just what I got. But it's pray, invite, give, and serve, right? And we've been talking about that. We have a bracelet. Hopefully you got a bracelet. If you don't have a bracelet, it has that on there, and you can help just serve as a reminder. But we talked in week 1 just specifically about praying bold, very specific prayer together, praying alone. Are we still praying together? All those, I think so. Hopefully, if you don't have that, we may just start another one when we get through these first 40 days. But we've talked about serving, and we've talked about last week about giving, and just challenging us to give and to be generous. And so this week, I want to talk to you about the last one of our 4 big pieces in the first 90 days, and that is inviting. And we've been talking about this church, or this ecclesia, this gathering. When I say church, and if you're new here, if you're a first-time visitor, when I say the word church, I'm not talking about this place. I'm talking about the human bodies sitting in this place, and the people that are sitting beside you, in front of you, and behind you. We are the church. We are this gathering that is this ecclesia, and we've talked about that. But what we want to talk about this morning is this time of year. There are 2 times a year where people really come to church, and it's Christmas and Easter, just to make sure they've got the bases covered. And so we want to make sure that so it's a really easy time for you to extend an invite to someone, and I want to spend some time talking about that. There's a scientific study that Mark forwarded to me this week, and it was very interesting. And it's in a scientific study of over 3,000 people, over 90%, and some of you will not be surprised by this, but over 90% of new church members say they attended church the first time because they were invited by a friend. Could I just see a show of hands of somebody who's here this morning because you were invited by somebody? Go ahead and hold them up like you were here. Okay, so we've got a lot. I'm not sure if we're exactly at 90%, but we're going to get better at that. But this number, and it gives, when you think about that number and the invitation, and interesting specifically about that invitation, that they were invited by a friend or a relative. When we looked at the survey, and I checked the survey, they listed in order, like that was the number 1. The number 1 was, 90% was church members attended church for the first time because they were invited by a friend or a relative. Underneath that, it was, and the second highest, which is interesting to me, was they noticed the church as they drove by. Isn't that interesting? That was the second reason why people come to a place, which is interesting. But that invitation of a friend or relative was above that. It was above, I was looking for a specific denomination. I had a child or family member that attended a daycare. Someone who I did not know invited me. I saw it on the internet. I attended a baptism or funeral or received a pamphlet or letter or some of the other reasons why people come to church. And so in other words, invitations to your friends or family is still the best way to get people to church. And we all know that to be true, and I guarantee that if we walked around to any other church in our country, and you think about our vision, and we want to light it up, and we want to get outside of the walls, and we want to be this church, excuse me, that is reaching people outside of these walls, I guarantee you could walk into any other church in Salem or in the country, and you would be hard-pressed to find a church that doesn't believe in outreach. There are very few churches. I mean, we're not unique in that vision to reach our community or to serve or to be a missional church or care for the lost. I mean, we're not Christopher Columbus here. We're not uncharted territory, you know. This is stuff that churches talk about all the time. And so I would bet you're never going to walk into a church and and hear them say, well, we don't really care about other people. we don't want to outreach. We don't want to tell anybody about the gospel of Jesus Christ. You're just going to be hard pressed to find a church like that, right? Most churches, if you walked in there and talked to the pastor or talked to the board or talked to their elders or whoever it is, and maybe members of their congregation, and you asked them, hey, what is your church about? Most of them probably at some point in time would say, hey, we're about reaching the lost, and we're about reaching lost people. But and our vision is much like many other churches. So we're not like, that's not groundbreaking or anything. The difference is, how good are we at it? And the difference is, are we actually doing what we say we're doing? And then there's a book called Organic Outreach that's written by Kevin Harney, and I want to read a quote out of his book. It says this: I have found that this declared commitment to evangelism is almost universal in the church. You would be hard-pressed to find a church that says, we don't believe in outreach. As a matter of fact, we stand aggressively against it. I mean, you're just not going to find it. The real issue facing the Western church today is that the efforts of very few churches are actually being fruitful. That many churches have hit a growth plateau and are in decline. They want to reach out, but they are not willing to pay the price. They are not willing to count the cost. And so my question to you, to this body of believers, and I'm talking to all of us here, are we willing to count the cost? Are we willing to count the cost and pay the price to reach lost people? Are we really willing? And I want to let that just sink in for a second. As a church, this is your church. It's not just my church. I'm your pastor, but this is our church. Are we willing to be that kind of people? And what kind of cost are we going to have to pay? What does it cost us? And I want to spend some time taking a look about what Jesus, excuse me, that was even worse. It's hard to, sorry. Hairball. I want to take a look at time. I want to look at what Jesus, he was a real historical figure, right? Because if we're a believer in Jesus Christ and you're a follower of Jesus Christ and you call yourself a Christian, you believe that Jesus was a real person. He's not a fairy tale. He's not somebody made up in a book. He was a real person that walked the face of the earth, who died, was resurrected, and we believe what sets us apart from every other religion is we believe that he rose from the dead, right? We believe that. So if you're a believer of Jesus Christ, I want to take a look at what he says. And really, when you look at what happened in the early church and when Jesus showed up on the scene, it happens to be, we look in the book of John, and John was he was a disciple. And when you look at the book of John, he was a guy, when we look at the book of John, it was written by a guy named John, right? He wrote the book. He was disciple. He was one of the original 12 disciples. He was actually the youngest disciple, and he was the only one to die of natural causes. Did you know that? All the rest of them were martyred. for what they believed in. And so John, in John chapter 1, verse 36 through 39, he talks about a time, and he's talking about another John named John the Baptist. And John the Baptist was a cousin of Jesus. And John the Baptist was telling everybody, hey, here's this guy, he's coming. And so we pick up that story here in 1 John chapter 36. As Jesus walked by, John looked at him. And John the Baptist, talking about John the Baptist, looked at him and declared, look, there is the Lamb of God. When John's two disciples heard this, they followed Jesus. So John the Baptist is like, hey, there's Jesus, and these two guys were standing here and going, okay, I'm going to follow that guy. And so Jesus notices that these two guys are following him, and here's what he says. Jesus looked around and saw them following, and he's like, what do you want? Jesus, like, have you ever been walking and, like, you notice somebody's, like stalking you? You're like, okay, what's up? Why are you following me? What do you want? That's what Jesus said. And then they replied, Rabbi, which means teacher, where are you staying? And Jesus very casually just come and see. Just come check it out. And they followed him. That's just mind-blowing to me that they just followed him. I love that Jesus said very simply, come and see, come check out Jesus. And maybe you're here this morning, and maybe that's what we just need to say to the people that we work with and we're walking around with. Why don't you just come check it out? Why don't you just come check it out? And very casually, Jesus said, come and see. And so we see Jesus offer the very first invitation to follow him in the book. You're the man. Thank you, sir. How about that guy? That doesn't. Thank you very much. Wow, that's impressive. That's loving like Jesus right there. Yeah. But I love that. And we see Jesus offer another invitation in the book of Matthew. When you look at it, in Matthew, who was another guy, I'll tell you a little bit about Matthew. Matthew was from Galilee. He was the first century guy from Galilee. He was a tax collector who would have been incredibly literate. He probably would have been educated, but he would have been not very popular among the people. And he would have been completely dishonest. He had no moral qualities. He did the actual job of collecting taxes. You'll hear about another tax collector in the Bible named Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus was actually over the tax collectors. Matthew was actually the guy that was in the trenches, going out and beating on your door and collecting your taxes. So he was really not very popular with people. And Jesus did the same thing to him, and he said to Matthew in chapter 4, verse 19, he said, come follow me, Jesus said. And then he goes on and he says, I will send you out to fish for people. She'll love that. You ever been fishing? I don't know. I'm a fisherman. I love to fish, but I'm not very good at it. But I can catch some fish, but I'm not as good as a guy that we have sitting here, which is Travis Gillett. And I talked to Travis before this, and he told me I could do this. So, but if you don't know Travis, that's the kind of fish Travis catches, okay? Mine are like that, just smaller. Mine are actually that big. But Travis is a fisherman, and so I read this passage, and I couldn't help but think, if we are a body of believers that are going to be fishers of people, if we're going to fish for people, so I reached out to Travis. I sent him a text and said, hey, if you had to give me your top picks, your top tips of what it takes to be a really good fisherman. Travis he's a pro, and so so he sent me 3 things, and so I appreciate that, Travis. And the very first thing that Travis said that it takes to be really good at fishing is to have a competitive drive. The very first thing that he said. You got to have a competitive drive. And so when you think about competition, I think it's usually in context of a sporting event like fishing or basketball or football. However, it takes many other forms as well. And so our competition as believers, we should be fighting for the souls of lost people. I see it as a competition. The competition in our culture has become a bad thing. And you ever notice that? Like everybody gets a trophy. You ever notice that? Like, no, you don't get a trophy. Not a winner. Everybody gets a trophy, and we're creating a bunch of babies that are Charmin Extra Soft, But in this letter to the Corinthians, Paul gives information. Paul, who was this guy, he was a Greek that became a follower of Jesus Christ. And he says this in 1 Corinthians 9:24, "Don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win." I am running this race to win. I want to fish for people, and it is a competition. And I don't know, I'm telling you right now that we are in a competition for the souls of your friends and your family and your coworkers and your grandchildren and your children. And if you don't believe me, look around. The most extreme form of competition is war, and in a battle where people are competing for domination and the consequences are the most severe because people die. I believe we're in that type of war with the enemy. It is a competition. And so I don't know about you, but if we're going to be a church, an ecclesia, a gathering of believers, or we're going to be worth our salt in anything, we've got to get into the game. We've got to start going to battle. We've got to quit posting about it on Facebook and how bad the world and politics and all that is and do something about it, because we have the answer. And it's a guy named Jesus. And are we willing to count the cost and share Jesus with people? He's Jesus. He's the risen Savior. He's not some made-up fairy tale. He's a real person. He died for the sins of the world. He's the Alpha, the Omega. He's the light of the world. He changed my life. He changed the life of my friends. He saved my family. He saved my life. He can save yours too. I believe that. And so I'm competitive. So if you tell me the first thing that I have to have is a competitive spirit, I don't know about you, but I'm sick of the enemy winning. I'm sick of seeing kids abused. I'm sick of divorce. I'm sick of friends battling depression. I'm sick of talking to parents whose kids are cutting themselves. I'm sick of burying kids who have hung themselves in closets. I'm sick of it. And I'm going to do something about it. We should all have that same competitive spirit. The enemy is out to get us. He's like a roaring lion seeking who he can devour. So the first thing I think that we have to do is start fishing. And we have to start winning. The second thing that Travis told me you needed to do was you had to have the ability to adapt to changing conditions. And I assume that's weather and water temperature and clarity and what the fish are eating or biting on, or where are they, if they're in deep water or shallow water or top water. And I think it may seem obvious to you, but I think for me, the first thing that we have to do, and this may be incredibly obvious to be a good fisherman, even outside of, being competitive and having the ability to change, to adapt. I think the first thing you have to do is you have to get to a body of water. Am I right, Travis? Because I'm just guessing you're not going to catch many in the parking lot. And you're not going to catch many, and we are not going to catch any fish sitting in this building. We are not going to catch any people sitting right here. So the first thing that we have to do, you won't find fish in your living room. And you'll have to cast a net or a line somewhere from time to time. And so when you think about church and what it's become and how we used to catch fish and how you catch now and how you catch people now and how we make this church relevant to people now in 2018, has anybody ever considered, in the past 30 years, how much has changed? You ever noticed that? So I've got some pictures just to kind of, it's what our $20 bill used to look like. Now it looks like this, right? Even our money's changed. What's the next one, Kathy? It's what our cars used to look like. 30 years. This is what they look like now. It's what a cab used to look like. What about the next one? 30 years. Anybody remember that? There's some kids in here today going, what the heck is that? Now we have this, right? What about the next one? It's what our video games used to look like. This is what they look like now, In 30 years, that's what our computers used to look like 30 years ago. That's what they look like now. In 30 years, you talk about adapting conditions. If we're still doing the same things we've always done, we're always going to get what we always have gotten. And so we are going to, as a church, are going to have to be creative about how we're reaching out, what we're doing, the things that we're doing. That's exactly why we're doing things different. That's why we're planning places different than we've never done before. And we're doing things like we have a conversation group at a local pub. It's called Pub Talks. We're trying to do something different and adapt to changing conditions of our cultures. 1 Corinthians 9:22 says this, when I'm with those who are weak, I share in their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news and share in its blessings. And in his book, Kevin Harney asked a couple questions. The first one of the questions is this. Are the people in your church willing to sacrifice to the point that they will joyfully embrace change? And change is difficult. Many believe in Jesus and they want to share the gospel, but many are unwilling to change. And we can't just keep fishing with the same lure. I've got to believe, Travis, if they're not biting on one lure, you're going to change, right? I mean, we can't just be standing in the same spot expecting us, I wonder why our church isn't growing. I wonder why we're not reaching people. I wonder why we're not baptizing people, why we're not reaching anybody that's lost, and do we even care about people? Another quote from the book, it says, today, if we want to be effective in reaching out to people with the gospel, we often need to invite them to belong before they will come to believe the message we preach. Isn't that interesting? All around us, people are looking for community, a place to develop significant, meaningful relationships with other people. They need to feel accepted before they will consider their changing beliefs. And this is an important mind shift for our churches. We are more comfortable expecting people to adopt to our beliefs and embrace our practices before they can be part of our church. You know what that means? That basically means we're going to have to actually reach out to people, and it's going to be messy. They're not going to look like us. They're not going to talk like church people. They're not going to do the things that church people do. Are we willing to count the cost as a church to reach those kind of people? I am. Last thing Travis told me that we needed was good equipment. And having the right equipment makes all the difference. And having the right equipment and being prepared makes all the difference. And it's hard to play baseball without a bat, right? It's hard to fish without a net or a pole or some other thing. So when we think about the world around us and we think about, I want you to think about your friends and your relatives and your loved ones and the people you work with and the people that you come into contact with every day. And I want you to think about what the greatest piece of equipment that we have. Does your church, here's the greatest piece, the question that'll answer that is this, and this is probably the most important thing that I've said all day. Does your church love people and long for them to know Jesus? And that's a question for us. Do we love people and long for them to know Jesus? Do we really love God and people? And here's the problem. I think sometimes we feel like we don't have what it takes. We don't think we have the kind of special equipment that we need to share the gospel with Jesus. I couldn't possibly talk to somebody, Trent, about Jesus Christ because I don't know, I don't know all this stuff about the Bible. What if they ask me a question I don't know? I'm going to feel like an idiot. I'm going to, they're probably going to unfriend me. Oh no. We don't feel like we have this, and I think sometimes some of us feel like we're fishing with this. Anybody have one of these growing up? Did had the pocket fisherman. Did you catch fish on it? Yeah, you did, right? I think sometimes, I had one of these. I caught fish on it. I got the old pocket, Ron Popeil pocket fisherman. I don't know if you ever had that. If you didn't know what that was, it was like this little fishing boat. It popped out, and it was awesome. Just whip it out any time. Just click. Find a body of water fish. I bet Doug Romine's got one. But the pocket fisherman, and I think sometimes we feel like we have to have the very big, and I think honestly, each one of us have the best piece of equipment that we need, and the only piece of equipment that we need. And it's found in this next scripture. It says, Jesus replied, in the book of Mark, there was a teacher of the law that was asking Jesus a question. And he asked Jesus a question, and the question was this: of all of the commandments, which is the most important? And then Jesus replied, the most important commandment is this: listen, O Israel. The Lord our God is the one and only Lord, and you must love the Lord God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than any of these. You want to know the best piece of equipment that we can have is to show the love of Jesus to a hurting world. To love people where they are, to love them in their mess, to love them despite the fact that they are lost, to show people love. Do we as a church, do any of us really even care that people, like these empty seats should break our heart? Not that coming to church is everything, but the fact that there is a town full of people out there and all around us that don't know Jesus. Do we love people enough to share Jesus with them? It's our greatest piece of equipment. It's rare that good things happen spontaneous. I think we have to make a plan. We have to pray bold. We have to pray that God burdens us for lost people. We have to love God and love people and invite them. And the last thing that Travis actually told me that he needs to do is never give up till the end. And I'm sure that you've probably caught something at the end of a tournament, right? Last cast, whatever it takes. Hebrews 6, 10, and 11 says this: For God is not unjust. He will not forget how hard you have worked for him and how you have shown your love to him. How? By caring for other believers as you still do. Our great desire is that you will keep on loving others as long as life lasts, in order to make certain that what you hope for will come true. So I want to ask you this morning, what are you hoping for when it comes to a relationship with Christ or people? Is there a husband somewhere that doesn't know Jesus? Is there a wife? Is there a child? Is there a coworker that you would love to see? Who's the one person in your mind that you would think that person would never come to church ever? That's who I want you to start working on. I want you to think about those people that you would think, when people walk into church, and it's interesting, I've been part of a church that it's just natural, it's just what we do. When somebody walks in, I've even had people that I go to church with like, hey, did you see who was here? Did you see who was actually here today? And it's one of those moments. I want you to think of those kind of people. And I want us to get aggressive with inviting people to church. I want to get us aggressive with sharing the gospel. So I want to give you some practical tips about what that looks like. Don't let their name or their nickname or their past or their reputations keep you from inviting them to Jesus. I think sometimes we have this concept of people that we think would be the last people on earth would want to hear about Jesus. And so we don't even throw our lure that way. And we don't give it a shot. We just like, well, they are never. There's no way they would ever come to know Jesus Christ. And so don't ever give up on somebody. Keep fighting till the end. Don't say they would never care to come to Jesus because you don't know. Just invite them and do whatever it takes to help them meet Jesus. So what we're going to ask you to do, and what I'm challenging you to do over the next few weeks, it's a super easy invite because people come to church on Christmas anyway. So it's a super easy invite. We've got some invite cards after the service that you can take and just hand them to your friend and say, hey, I'd love to have you come to church. But more importantly than that, we'll talk about some other things you can invite. But in closing, here's how it works. Here's how this invitation works. It's very casually. Jesus said to those guys, hey, just come check it out. Come follow me. And so John points his friends to Jesus, and Jesus invites Andrew, and Andrew invites Peter, and Simon invites Philip, and Philip invites Nathanael. You can read about this in the New Testament. Nathanael invites somebody, and then that person invites somebody who invited someone, who invited someone, who invited someone, and on and on and on for thousands of years until somebody invited you. And here we sit because somebody over thousands of years invited somebody else to follow Jesus. And so I want to challenge you this morning. if we are that type of church, are we the type of church that cares enough to count the cost, and whatever that cost is to you? Maybe it's a little bit awkward conversation by the coffee pot at work. Maybe it's handing somebody a card that says, come to church. I don't know what it is. Are we willing to invite lost people that don't know Jesus, just to come check it out? Trust me, I'm not going to cram Jesus down their throat. If it would work, I would do it. I would stuff him so far down people's throat they would gag on him. But that doesn't work. I just want you to extend an invitation to build a relationship with them. And I think sometimes we think the difference that, I want you to think about the difference that invitation has made in your life. And especially some of you that have recently found Christ or gotten back to church. Just imagine what your life would be without him. I want you to think about the forgiveness and the freedom that you feel. Think about the influence that Jesus has had on your family and on your loved ones and upon your church, all because somebody invited you. And this is how Jesus changes the world, through invitations of others who know him. It's not by me preaching on Sunday, as much as I would love to think so. The real works happen when you invite other people to know Jesus. And so what are you invited them for? Who are you inviting? Invite them to your house. Get to know people. Build a relationship. Most importantly, that's huge. Invite them to pub talks on Wednesday. Invite them to a grow group. A grow group may be intimidating. Maybe just saying, you want to grab lunch sometime. Build a relationship with people and begin to invite. So this morning I want to ask you, I'm just going to leave you with that. I'm just going to challenge you with that. We've got invite cards at the back here. It's what Jesus has told us to do. We're going to be really good at it. We're going to pray, invite, give, and serve. And that's the kind of church that we're going to be relentless in our invitations to people. We've got some invite cards as you leave this morning, and I would just ask you to challenge. I'm going to ask you to stand with me this morning, and I'll pray for you. Father, thank you so much for what your word teaches us. And Lord, how we can learn about to be fisher of men. Help us to fish for people, Lord. Help us to be passionate and loving and care about people who are lost. I pray, Lord, that you would ignite a fire, a burden in our heart for somebody who doesn't know Jesus, somebody that's going through a horrible divorce, somebody who's having issues with their kids, somebody who's having financial crisis, somebody who is just lost or lonely and has no kind of community. Lord, we know that there are people that are looking for community in this town. And Father, I just pray that you would ignite a fire in this church, in this body of believers, in this ecclesia, in this gathering of people that we are, Lord, to take this good news of Jesus Christ, that he is a real person, that he walked the face of the earth, that he died and he rose again, and that his spirit dwells with us and can change our lives forever. Lord, I just pray that you would help us to reflect on what our lives would be like without you, without the difference that you've made in our life. And Father, I just pray that you would just continue to help us to be bold and courageous. Lord, help us to enter our workplace, help us to enter our schools, and help us to reach out to those that we know need you. And Father, I just pray that you would take us from this place. Thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your grace and your forgiveness. In your precious holy name I pray.